MG Rob back with you, and today we're going to finish up all the last of the little projects on the TR6. Let's go. So after putting the original float bowls back on the carburetors with new seals and gaskets, because Bill had changed out the float bowls with solid ones from an MG that he had laying around because they were leaking all over the place, I, being me, took the time to clean up the manifold a little bit and get some of the grime and gunk off of it. I'm not sure it really looks a lot better, but at least you can handle it now without getting your hands all grimy. Now, working on this reminds me why I don't do a lot more Triumph work than I actually do, because I'm not a big fan of the way they mount these manifolds. They have these pinch. I mean, most of your British cars do that, but the way they make them in here with the pinch bolts, or the pinch, I don't know what you want to call them exactly. My brain's not working right now. But they're very, very difficult for me to get my big mitts up inside here and actually put those on. You need much smaller hands to work on these than what I have. Also, me being me, I don't like putting any new hoses on with the old clamps. But these little narrow clamps, like I got right here, and see, it's hard to get right here, seem to be getting a little hard to get a hold of anymore. And those were the last 4 that I had in stock. And the place that I usually get them is completely out of stock on them right now. So I'm having to go with the bigger, fatter clamps that I don't like so well, because that's the only thing I can get right now. And one little tip to putting these on here: wash your hands before you handle them, because they do pick up the fingerprints pretty easily with that cloth covering on them. So one other issue I come up with on this car was it was backdated with the earlier upper radiator hose, which eliminates the connector with the adapter for the temperature vacuum unit that was on it. But he had bought the correct original hose kit for this year car, which means I didn't have that connector anymore. So after poking around a little bit with local stuff trying to find something, turns out that, you know, this being roughly 1.25 inches makes options a little bit limited. So while I was at the tubing place getting my picking up my roll bars for Ginsu, I got a piece of 1 3/16 16 wall tubing, which will fit pretty nicely in here. And what I did was I ran around the edge right here with the TIG welder and just ran a bead all the way around this edge, and then cleaned it up on the grinder just to keep it a fairly minimal size and consistent, so that I can put that on there and put the hose clamp around there and don't have to worry about it trying to pull off. So that'll fix that dilemma, and I can keep moving forward putting the cooling hoses together as soon as I find the one I misplaced. Now, one of the notable differences between the MGs and Triumphs when you're working on them is the slave cylinder and the way they do it. Triumph generally uses some version of this type of slave cylinder here, whether it's pinched in or mounted or whatever. It's still this basic style. So the hose always comes in down on the bottom with a bleed nipple on the top. Now, in the case of the TR6, it is canted a little bit, which does make it a little bit easier to get a wrench on there to bleed it. But in the case of, like, say the Spitfire or the late Midget, which uses the Spitfire engine and transmission, it is much more difficult to actually get in there and put a wrench on that than it is on this one. So of course I'm replacing all of this with new stuff here. I went ahead and got the hose as well as the slave cylinder and the master cylinder. Probably could have got away without replacing the hose, because these don't deteriorate quite as badly as the rubber ones do. But we're doing it. Now I will, if you notice, this has a nail stuck in it to hold all this together. So I will get rid of that and put a cotter pin in like it's supposed to have. All right, so the TR6 slave cylinder, a lot of times this surface is machined and this side isn't. But on this one here, both sides are machined. Now, regardless of which side is machined, it has to be put in through this way, towards on this side of the bracket. Because if you put this machine face on this side of the bracket, it can overextend the piston and blow it out. So now one of the interesting anomalies of these old British cars is on the clutch lines, I know on the MGs and on the Triumphs, they held on to old British pipe thread sizes. So this end here is actually a 5/16 Whitworth wrench to take it apart, and this end's a 3/16, where up at the master cylinder it's 1/4 inch. Now when you buy the new hoses, this is 17 millimeter and that end's 13 millimeter. So it does make it a lot easier to work on them in today's world when it's so hard to find Whitworth wrenches for a reasonable price. And I have yet to find any Whitworth brake line wrenches, which is what you should be using on this stuff. Now I'm going to stop at this moment and take the time to go ahead and do the fuel pump, the hoses, and fuel filter while the clutch line is disconnected and it's not in my way to work. Now this has a tack drive cable on it, and that cable goes so close to the pump here, it makes it really difficult to get these fittings off without going ahead and taking the cable off first. So we'll take that off, and then it allows me to get to the fittings. So aside from the priming lever, these pumps look almost identical to each other. And this one here, of course, the priming lever works exactly like it should. Now these things come with new ferrules or olives, however you want to say them, for the lines, and they should always be replaced. All right, so we determined we were going to replace the rear wheel cylinders on this because the one side over there looked pretty iffy, and if we're going to do the one, we might as well do them both. And we're replacing the hoses as well. Now, Triumphs tended to use a wheel cylinder that was very, very similar, whether it was the TR6 or like the Spitfire, a very, very similar design, because this actually acts as the pivot for the e-brake lever, and this sits in here through this hole, and it's floating. It floats within this hole. So they have this seal that goes around this that actually seals around the lever, and then they have this clip system. Now whether you're talking this or the Spitfire, it's a very similar clips, but they are not the same between the two. Where these tabs here lock in to there, so once you put this, so once this goes underneath here on the back side, and then this slides in here, then it locks in there. Of course, you're gonna have the thickness of the backing plate underneath there, so then it'll snap into these little notches, and then this thing can slide back and forth within there while blocking the parts of the hole that would otherwise be exposed. And as always, me being me, I wire brushed the backing plate, gave it a quick coat of paint so that it'll be nice and clean, and next time somebody gets in here it won't be nearly as manky to work with. Now I may at some point get in the way of the camera for this, but here we go. It's a good idea, go ahead and put just a tiny bit of grease right on here just to make that pivot nice and smoothly and not worry about rust. So you put that in there, and then we slide this in, and then this goes in that notch there to act as the pivot. But then we got to get the seal up over here. And this is where it gets difficult, actually, because this, with this in place, gets really difficult to put on there. So you can't really have it quite in place like you want it to. I think it's a little bit easier to do it this way myself. I'm sure everybody who does this has their own way of doing it. But you gotta make sure that that rubber seal's in there. And for some reason I'm hanging up here. Oh, I think I know what I just did there. I stuck it with the tabs going the wrong direction. They have to go out towards the inside of the car. I thought I had it that way, but I guess I didn't. So now it doesn't hang on the rubber seal. And then you can put this through here and pop that over there and get everything sitting the way you need it there. And then we take this one, slide this one in on top until it clips in to the other one. And then this thing will move back and forth relatively freely as the brake shoes need it to keep it centered. All right, so that may have seemed slightly scatterbrained in how I did that, but sometimes, you know, I'm starting and stopping on a car, I'm working on it over multiple days with other stuff going on. That's just how it ends up working out, and that's how I end up working on the cars. So it is what it is. So, as always, if you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe, share with your friends. This is MG Rob. Later.